Okay, so if I asked you to name the single commodity that is absolutely indispensable to the modern world, I mean, the material that powers, the electric car you want, the advanced missile systems defending our allies, the giant magnets in a wind turbine, you might say lithium or maybe copper.
And you'd be close, but you'd be missing the real prize.
Exactly. The answer is a group of materials most people have never even heard of, rare earth
Or
elements.
REs. And they're not actually all that rare in the Earth's crust, which is a common misconception. The issue is they're incredibly difficult and very disruptive to process.
Right.
And for our purposes, you just need to know they're defined by two things: massive economic importance and an almost impossibly high risk of supply disruption. And that's because it's all concentrated in one major global player.
Exactly. These materials are the quiet, often ignored backbone of the entire green energy transition and really the whole digital economy. They're what let our tech get smaller, lighter, and so much more powerful. And right now, the global fight to secure them is maybe the fiercest, highest stakes geopolitical scramble happening just beneath the daily headlines.
That's the perfect high-level view.
Yeah.
So our mission today, the sources you've provided, is to really unpack this high-stakes competition. We're going to analyze the immediate crisis, which is China's aggressive tightening of its chokehold, and then we'll do a true deep dive into the massive multi-continent response.
A response that involves, direct government funding from the U.S. and the EU.
And the emergence of genuinely surprising new players. We're talking about Turkey and Norway. We
Woo!
need to know what they're finding and if it's even enough.
Let's start right there with the elephant in the room, China. Their dominance isn't just a historical accident, is it? It's a deliberate strategic reality.
And it's not just about mining.
No, it's about the entire value chain.
And what's fascinating here is understanding the true depth of that dominance. Our sources confirm China commands around 60% of the world's primary REE production.
Which is a massive number on its own.
It is, but the real leverage, the strategic chokehold, is in the refinement. They control a staggering 90% of global refining capacity.
90%. And that processing step is the key bottleneck, which I know we'll come back to. But for a place like the EU, that dependency is nearly total.
It is, yeah. The EU is the perfect case study here. For their high-performance applications, so think specialized motors, industrial magnets, they source 98% of their heavy rare earth magnets directly from China.
So if China sneezes,
Europe's entire industrial strategy catches a cold. It's that simple.
and China has been extremely clear they see this as a national security asset.
And a strategic tool, absolutely. We saw this manifest most aggressively with the expansion of their export controls back in 2025, which just fundamentally changed the rules of the game.
That's a critical point. Let's double-click on that. These new rules, they broadened the scope dramatically, didn't they?
They did. Historically, the controls focused on the physical metals, what they call Part 1 items. Now, the controls explicitly extend to the related technology, the engineering services, even the technical support.
So if you need Chinese expertise to build a refinement plant somewhere else,
That expertise is now under Beijing's strategic control.
but the part that has Western policymakers scrambling is the extraterritorial application of these rules. So wait, if I buy a highly specialized microchip in, say, Germany, and just 0.1% of the input material came from a Chinese source,
Then Beijing can claim jurisdiction over its export.
how do they even justify that?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting, because the new Chinese controls are deliberately mirroring the U.S. Export Administration regulations, the long arm of U.S. trade law. The new rules state that foreign-made downstream products, your Part 2 items, things like finished magnets, specialized components, they're now subject to Chinese export licensing if they contain just 0.1% or more of Chinese origin REEs.
So even if a company manufactures a magnet in Texas, if the trace source materials came from China, Beijing claims jurisdiction over its future sale or transfer. That's staggering. They're trying to enforce their will completely outside their own borders?
Well, their stated reason is to stop companies from getting around the ban, what they call countering circumvention, and to safeguard national security. They specifically cited cases where they claimed Chinese origin materials or tech were transferred to sensitive military fields by foreign entities.
And the market impact of this must create immediate uncertainty, right? Especially in cutting edge fields.
Precisely. Think about artificial intelligence. Every major AI firm, from the giants down to the startups, relies on REE-containing components for their advanced hardware. If those firms also happen to provide services for military applications, sourcing those components now means navigating much tougher scrutiny, potentially much longer approval times.
Which is death for an R&D cycle.
Exactly. As one source put it, this licensing system is a profoundly flexible tool for Beijing. They can calibrate access to these materials in real time, depending on what's happening geopolitically.
Okay, so if Beijing is using these legal and regulatory tools, let's pivot to Washington. They're using financial tools, and this is where that brute force strategy really kicks in. The U.S. is basically overriding market economics entirely.
They almost have to. I mean, that approach is structurally mandatory. Private investment has always shied away from REEs because China can just set output quotas, flood the market, and drive down prices overnight.
So no private company wants to build a $500 million plant just to get undercut by Beijing.
Exactly. So the U.S. government had to step in with massive capital and, crucially, guaranteed pricing to de-risk the entire sector.
Right, and when we say the U.S. government, we really need to talk about the Department of Defense, or as it's now often called, the Department of War, or DOWD. And that landmark deal they struck with MP Materials in July of 2025.
The one that owns the Mountain Pass mine, the only active U.S. REE mine.
That's the one.
This deal is the ultimate example of state intervention in the free market. The Dow took a $400 million stake in MP Materials.
Instantly making them the largest stakeholder.
But the most important part was the guaranteed price structure.
Give us the numbers on that, because the scale of this is almost unbelievable.
It is. The Dow guaranteed a floor price of $110 per kilogram for neodymium praseodymium, or NPR. That's the most critical rare earth for high-performance magnets.
And to put that in context for you, the market price for NPR at that time, July 2025, was hovering just over $66 a kilogram. So wait, the U.S. government is agreeing to pay roughly 67% more than the open market price. They're just underwriting the entire thing.
We're paying a security premium. The cost is irrelevant compared to the risk of a total supply failure. This price guarantee allows MP Materials to make long-term investment decisions, securing $1 billion in loans for their huge 10X magnet facility being built in Texas.
So the goal isn't the cheapest price.
The goal is a guaranteed American price, and to build the manufacturing infrastructure that just doesn't exist today.
And what's the strategic target for that Texas facility?
Strategic self-sufficiency, at least for the defense and green energy sectors. U.S. domestic consumption for magnets is about 40,000 tons a year. 30,000 of that is embedded in imported products, cars, appliances.
Okay.
The other 10,000 tons is for domestic manufacturing. This new facility, it aims to roughly match that 10,000 tons.
Making the U.S. secure in its most critical national defense and high-tech supply, that is a massive strategic win.
Huge. And beyond just domestic underwriting, the U.S. is also aggressively locking up international partnerships to build the processing capacity they lack.
You're thinking of that high-profile joint venture with Saudi Arabia's Maiden, right?
Well, exactly. It's a fascinating intersection of resource security and geopolitics. The U.S., through the Dow and MP Materials, is partnering with the Saudi mining giant Maiden to develop an REE refinery right there in the kingdom. But it's structured with U.S. oversight. The MP-DAOW coalition is targeting a 49% stake, and the Dow is providing non-recourse financing.
So they're using resource finance as a tool to ensure supply chain resiliency.
And to counterbalance other influences in the Middle East, yeah.
And it's not just the 17 rare earths. We're also seeing efforts focused on companion materials like gallium.
Another key weakness, China controls 98% of the world's gallium production. The U.S. is actively looking at underwriting operations by companies like Rio Tinto in Canada, or maybe incentivizing a new domestic processing plant.
A plant supplied by bauxite from partners like Jamaica or Brazil.
That's the idea, because gallium is often a byproduct of bauxite processing. They're finding creative solutions in existing supply chains.
Meanwhile, you have the EU and Japan running their own parallel efforts.
That's right. The EU is using its Critical Raw Materials Act to support projects in France, Italy, Poland, Sweden. And they're also building collective purchasing power. They announced the Resource EU initiative in October 2025 for joint purchasing and stockpiling.
And private industry is getting involved too. I saw Canada's Neomagnequench is building a magnet plant in Estonia.
To serve the European EV market, yeah. Everyone's getting strategic.
And Japan's move into Central Asia is arguably the most dramatic infrastructural play outside the West itself.
Absolutely. Japan announced a massive 5-year investment, 3 trillion yen, which is about $19 billion, all focused on Central Asia, specifically Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan.
And the goal there is to secure mineral supply.
and to dramatically upgrade regional infrastructure. Crucially, a big part of that funding is for building out the Trans-Caspian route. It's a direct logistical effort to bypass overland routes controlled by both Russia and China. It's a huge bet on future Eurasian logistics.
So let's shift gears. These massive geopolitical efforts are being spurred not just by risk, but by genuine new resource discoveries that are reshaping the physical map. I mean, we have to talk about the sheer scale of Turkey's new find.
Turkey's Belikova deposit.
Yep.
It is a true game changer. It completely shifts the global reserve calculations. The discovery from 2022 is estimated at 694 million tons of ore,
Which, if accurate, positions Turkey as the world's second largest REE reserve holder.
trailing only China's massive Bayanobo holdings.
That's an incredible scale. And Turkey is moving fast to capitalize on this, embracing what they're calling resource nationalism.
They're prioritizing autonomy. The pilot plant for processing started up back in April 2023. Construction for the full-scale separation plant is slated for 2024 and 2025, with a target commissioning date of 2026 or 2027. Their stated goal is public oversight and domestic processing. They're explicitly refusing to just export raw ore. They want to capture that value and use the materials for their own defense and clean energy industries.
And they seem to be walking a very careful diplomatic line here, threading the needle between major powers.
They absolutely are. They have to. They need the technology and expertise China has in refinement, which is why they signed an MOU with China in October 2024. But at the same time, they're engaging in critical minerals dialogues with the U.S. and the EU, showcasing their new deposits as a potential lifeline for Western supply.
Everyone wants a piece of that 694 million ton pie.
Of course. And Europe also has a true domestic anchor now, which was announced in Norway.
Right, the Fen carbonatite complex.
Yes. Rare Earths Norway announced it in June 2024. It's continental Europe's largest RE deposit. While it's smaller than Turkey's find, it's strategically located to support Europe's urgent green transition goals. It gives the EU a secure domestic foundation.
And then back in the U.S., you have the Silicon Ridge mine discovery near Utah Lake. This is exciting not just because it's domestic, but the geology itself seems to change the whole calculus of extraction.
This is a potential technological breakthrough. The discovery includes gallium and germanium essential for chips and AI. The key difference is the minerals are suspended in clay, not hard rock. The company reports this allows for easier, cheaper extraction that can be, and I'm quoting, virtually zero waste.
Because it avoids the need for explosives or harsh chemicals?
Exactly. No high heat, no volume-intensive chemicals you need for traditional rock processing. It could potentially solve the environmental nightmare before it even starts. And the local Provo processing plant gives them a fast ramp-up potential.
Which is exactly what the U.S. needs right now.
Exactly. It changes the cost-benefit analysis. But, the global map isn't just about new winners. We have to pause and address the reality check that came from Vietnam.
That was a real cautionary counterpoint to all the optimism, wasn't it?
It was. For years, Vietnam was seen as a potential diversification champion. But in January 2025, the U.S. Geological Survey drastically reduced its estimate for Vietnam's REE reserves. They cut it from a massive 22 million metric tons down to just 3.5 million.
Wow, dropping it to sixth place globally.
When reminding everyone that announced reserves aren't the same thing as validated production capacity that can actually be scaled.
So what does this all mean for the competition? We've seen all this money and political will poured into the system, but we keep coming back to the same painful fact. The hardest part of the rare earth supply chain isn't finding the ore. It's that brutal midstream bottleneck of processing and refining.
That is the core challenge. Mining is just step one. Building refining capacity is immensely difficult and costly. We're talking about $500 million per plant. The process uses extremely heavy chemicals, specifically cracking and leaching the rock. This can create significant environmental hazards and stress local water resources, especially in drought-prone areas like West Texas, where some of these new facilities are going up.
And that's before you even get to the waste problem.
Precisely. Rare earth elements are often associated with naturally occurring radioactive materials, like trace amounts of thorium or uranium. The cracking and leaching process isolates those elements, creating radioactive waste that has to be managed long-term. And this reality, it naturally galvanizes public opposition and makes regulatory approval incredibly difficult.
Which is one of the reasons China was able to dominate decades ago. Fewer environmental constraints.
Exactly. And we keep coming back to that fundamental price dilemma. The market structure itself is broken. Since China can set output quotas and drive down prices, long-term private investment just won't materialize on its own.
That's right. So sustained government funding subsidies, tax incentives, the kind of direct investment that Dow did, it remains a structural necessity.
It does. And there's another challenge in the U.S. specifically. The long-term struggle to recruit a qualified workforce for the mining and chemical processing sectors. It necessitates major support for university programs, maybe even workforce exchanges with partners like Australia or Japan.
Okay, let's unpack this for you. We're in this unique high-stakes moment where global demand for these 17 critical metals is just skyrocketing. It's being driven by clean energy, EVs, defense applications, you name it. China has tightened its grip aggressively, using these novel extraterritorial controls to solidify its chokehold on refinement. And in response, the US, the EU, and their allies are throwing massive amounts of money and policy support at diversification, creating a new, maybe fragile resource map in some really unexpected places like Turkey and Utah.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, you see that despite these massive coordinated efforts, the world is still structurally playing catch-up. Demand for these critical minerals is projected to grow around 17% per year. That demand growth may still significantly outpace the new refining capacity coming online in the next 5 years.
Meaning that reliance on China, while it might diminish in some key areas.
The total dependency may not be broken entirely, at least not in the short term. The political priority is clearly on achieving strategic self-reliance and ensuring value capture, making sure those high-value processing steps stay domestic or near shore, even if it costs significantly more.
Which raises a really important question for you to consider as you process all this. Given the immense environmental costs, the public opposition, and the sheer capital required to build and sustain these complex, controversial processing facilities for rare earth elements, what role will technological innovation like developing entirely new magnet chemistries that significantly reduce or even eliminate the need for rare earths, something like Niren Magnetics' efforts with iron nitride magnets? What role will that play in truly winning the global supply chain race over the next decade?